I still remember the day those teenagers shoved that old woman right into the street, not just the words, but the sharp elbow that knocked her groceries to the curb and left tomatoes rolling into the gutter, her wrist bent up all wrong. And I remember thinking, folks have no idea who's sitting right here on this bench, watching every second, because in Maplewood, I'm just the old guy with a cane, minding my own business nobody knows. Nobody asks, and honestly, I've learned that's usually for the best, but sometimes the world doesn't let you stay invisible. You know what I mean? Anyway, I watched that scene play out, that group of kids, all noise and swagger, the ringleader tall and skinny with a cigarette, barking out insults, and when he caught sight of me helping the woman up, "Hey, Grandpa, no one asked you to play hero." I didn't bite, just dusted off her tomatoes, said something about respect, but let their laughter roll over me like I'd learned to do in places a lot meaner than this sleepy little park back in days when waiting, watching, and choosing your moment could mean life or death. People don't know what it takes not to act, not to let your blood get hot. The hardest fights, always the one inside your own chest, not out there in the street. But the thing is, silence sometimes rattles the young more than threats ever could. And that's what made those kids pause for a second. I walked away. The woman walked away. But the park felt different after that, like something bad had taken root, and everyone else pretended not to see it. Folks started steering clear, not just of the troublemakers, but of each other, heads down, steps quick. That's when Danny started showing up every afternoon, riding that rusty bike, all 9 years old, more questions than teeth, asking about the Marines, about his dad who never came home, about why people could be so mean, and I just nod, sometimes mutter a semper fi, mostly just listen, because sometimes that's all a kid needs, someone steady, someone who's seen enough to know when to speak and when to hold back. But kids are sharp, they catch what grown-ups pretend to miss, and it was Danny who saw first that those boys were getting bolder, tipping trash cans, knocking over dogs, pushing old folks, and it was Danny who sat next to me, nervously chewing his lip, asking, "You're not going to do anything?" I told him, "Ain't time." He wanted to know when it would be. Said if you wait too long, sometimes not doing anything is the same as letting them win. And, he wasn't wrong, but the truth is every fight costs something, and I made a promise a long time ago not to pay that price unless there was no other way. Still, you can only let so much slide. That next week, the boys tripped me in broad daylight, didn't even bother to hide it, just stuck out a foot, sent me sprawling hard enough to draw blood. Folks saw. No one did a thing, and that hurt more than the fall. Danny ran to help, his voice shaking. "Why didn't you hit him back?" And I looked at him, no anger, just tired, and tried to explain that strength isn't always about hitting. Sometimes it's about holding the line inside, about not letting them change who you are, but the world doesn't always reward that. That night, I couldn't sleep, stared at that old wooden box in the corner, the one with medals with memories I never asked for, and I could almost hear Maria, my wife, reminding me of the promise I made to put down the fight, to let the war inside go. But Maplewood was changing, and so was the air it got, so folks crossed the street to avoid the park. Kids handed over lunch money pass. Grown men looked away, and those 5 boys seemed to grow bigger in the silence. I watched every day, fingers tight around the cane, and every day Danny would check in, his voice a little smaller, his eyes a little older. Then one Tuesday was too much. Danny came late, face bruised, lips split, telling me they'd gone after his friend Lucas. Said if Danny opened his mouth again, they'd shut it for good. I patched him up as best I could and told him there are 2 kinds of pain, the kind that teaches and the kind that just makes you mean you gotta learn the difference. That night, I followed the boys from a distance, watching how the leader barked orders, how the smallest looked scared, how none of them were as tough as they tried to seem. 2 days later, they shoved me at the market, groceries everywhere, blood down my temple, and again I got up, brushed myself off, walked away. But that night, I sat in Maria's old room, staring at her picture, thinking about the promise, thinking about what she'd say now. I'd spent my whole life fighting in jungles, in alleys inside my own mind, but I'd promised to lay it down for good. But then they crossed the line. They grabbed Danny, dragged him off behind the rail yard to that old warehouse. And when the neighbor told me, I didn't hesitate. I wrapped that old black belt around my waist, grabbed my cane, and told Maria's picture, "Forgive me, but someone's got to do something." The warehouse was dark, filled with broken glass and shadows, but I found those boys, quick 5 of them, surrounding Danny, threatening him, and when I stepped out of the dark, there was a silence so thick you could taste it. The leader recognized me. First, you could see it in his eyes, that fear that doesn't come from what you see, but what you suddenly understand. They tried to laugh it off, but I let my cane fall, and then I moved. The first went down silent, breath gone before he hit the floor. The second swung wide. I flipped him. Easy, years of practice, never leave your bones. The third tried for a knife. I disarmed him, pinned him against a pillar, told him respect isn't something you demand. It's what you lose when you hurt someone weaker. The youngest didn't move, just stared, and I told him to go home. He ran. Danny was shaken but alive. I cut him loose, brushed him off, and as we walked out, I called back to those boys that nobody ever taught them right, so I did, and don't make me come teach it twice. Out under the streetlights, Danny asked why I broke my promise, and I told him sometimes trouble finds people who don't deserve it, and when it does, it needs to be reminded that men like me are still watching. By the time the cops rolled up, it was over. They knew who I was. One even nodded and said, "Evening, Sergeant," like old times. News spread slow. In Maplewood, a grainy video, a photo in the Gazette. Whispers that the old man on the bench had been something more all along. The boys disappeared from the park. Respect crept back in, not as a shout, but a quiet, morning thing. Flowers left on my porch, a pie, a note. People started to nod when they passed me, sometimes stopped to say hello. Danny came by every day, started a training log, said he wanted to know when to step in, not just how to fight. And I told him I didn't train to fight people. I trained because I was scared of myself. The power you carry, you have to know when not to use it. Eventually, I took over the old firehouse, started a dojo, no neon signs, no trophies, just a place to teach respect, discipline, a safe space to lay down burdens. Kids filled the mats, even some of the old troublemakers, and the town started to feel like home again. One morning, Danny brought a clipping from the paper. The old man with the cane was Chuck Norris all along. I didn't frame it, just folded it up with Maria's photo, knowing she'd have approved. And that's what I want folks to take from this: strength isn't in the punch, but in knowing when not to throw it. Change comes slow, not with fireworks, but in kids learning to stand a little straighter, in hands that help instead of hurt. So, if this story got to you like it did to me, tell me, what would you have done? Is there a time to fight, or is there more power in holding the line? Let's talk about it right here, right now. Because maybe what the world needs isn't more heroes, but more folks willing to stand up quietly and remind us all what right looks like.